Shawn Leight is the International Vice President of the Institute of Transportation Engineers and Vice President at CBB Transportation Engineers and Planners right here in St. Louis. Shawn is also an adjunct professor of transportation engineering at Washington University here in St. Louis, where he's taught transportation engineering and planning since 2003. Shawn is a passionate leader who works to improve communities by forging relationships and advancing forward-thinking solutions. Shawn engages with professionals across the U.S. and internationally to develop a vision for future transportation systems that will improve our lives and the planet. Welcome, Shawn.
There we go. So I want to get two things with the presentation tonight. If there's two things we can get done, I'll consider success. First, I want to give you my perspective on where transportation in general is heading coming into the future. We've all experienced a massive change in communications over the course of several years. It's really altered the way that we live life. We're going to see that a change in transportation along the same order of magnitude, and it's important for all of us to recognize what that is, and you as bicycle drivers, I guess all of us, what that can mean for that and how you need to be involved. Second, I'm a traffic engineer, right, by training. You all are trying to do a lot of things with advocacy. You had a chart up there that had a circle that had engineering on it. We can figure out how to work better together. And I want to talk a little bit and have a dialogue about how we can work better together through that process. And don't tell anybody, right, this is just between us, but I'll tell you all of our little secrets on how we can get that done. So a little bit about my background. So full disclosure, I'd call a recreational rider. I have been a bicycle commuter in the past. When I was in grad school, I rode into school for a number of years. And here in St. Louis, I tried it for a couple of years. We don't have showers at the work. So my co-workers actually appreciated when I stopped trying to ride into work and smelled bad all day. But I am a cycle savvy. So I got to know Karen. We'll tell that story a little bit. And I am certified cycle savvy. Karen and I made sure that we made that happen this summer. In anticipation for this. So, and again, I wear three hats, so I'm a vice president in our company, so I do a lot of this traffic studies and with ITE in the adjunct. So before we get going, there is what we think there's what the world thinks traffic engineers do. So I want to put this out there. This is what the world thinks that we do, and then we can get into the discussions.
No problem for many commuters. But a study from the Department of Transportation offers a practical solution.
Most traffic problems are caused by poor communication between drivers. Many who do not realize that there are other cars behind them. The number one thing that could make driving in this country smoother and more enjoyable is an increase in honking.
Here's how it works. A driver stuck in dense traffic honks his horn to alert the other drivers that someone needs to get through. The other drivers move to the left and the right, allowing the no longer obstructed car to go on its way.
Your repeated honking will send a clear message to other drivers. Please excuse me, but I would like to pass.
For drivers in a real hurry, the department suggests honking in an emphatic, repetitive manner. Or, in a worst-case scenario, depress the horn continuously until traffic begins to move again.
Honk, honk, honk. It's that simple.
To get the message out, the Department of Transportation has launched a nationwide ad campaign this week. The agency expects honking could eliminate roughly 90% of traffic problems. The remaining 10% could be eliminated by some combination of swearing and fist shaking. Next up, why...
All right. So that's, again, what the world thinks that we do. And I'd be quite honest, from the Facebook, debate we have sometimes, I don't know that's that far off. So what we do in reality, and I'm going to tell you a little history story, a little story about just kind of where we've come as a profession. And the big two things that I learned in grad school were safety and mobility, and I'll talk about both of those. And those are very important things. So we provide mobility to the country, and that deals with freight, it deals with economic development, it deals with sprawl, unfortunately, right? So we build highways and we get some of that, but people being able to get to work. So I consider when we have movements of goods, those types of things across the country, that's a success, and that we have some economic activity going on, that's jobs, that's money, that's things that are really important. St. Louis, that's really important because we're kind of an inland port. We've got the second largest inland port, the second, third largest rail hubs in the country are in Missouri, interstates. And then At a national level, we had this interesting thing where we had this increasing vehicle miles traveled. That's what this line is. And we leveled off around the recession, right? And there was a big debate, and I was involved in a panel discussion in Hollywood, Florida. And the question was, has vehicle miles traveled peaked? Are we at the end of growing traffic? And I think I was the only one who said, yeah, I don't think so. And then we can see that starting to go back up again. So the other thing, again, that we're really focused on is safety. And the reason is, when you look at leading cause of death in the United States, a lot of people don't realize 8 to 24, the leading cause of death in the U.S. is motor vehicle accidents. And if we go from 4 to 34, it's either 1 or 2. So that's a big deal, right? We've made tremendous strides given this over the decades. When you look at the number of annual fatalities and we go across, it's been 30, maybe up to 60, but now we're back maybe to 30,000. It looks like we haven't made a lot of progress. But when you look at the rate back in the early 50s, we were at about 7 fatals per 100 million vehicle miles. Now we're down to 1. We've eliminated 85% of the roadway deaths in this country, which is a huge number. It's pretty staggering when you look at that progress. And some of it's road engineering, a lot of it's vehicle, a lot of it's education and laws, better laws, right? I bring this up because the success that we've had as a profession with this, we can also have with bicyclists and pedestrians if we put our resources and our talents together. So the safety issues that you all experience, if we put our heads together and we solve this in the right way, we can see those same types of gains. And so that really, I saw taken off in our industry 5 to 10 years ago. And I like to put a date on it, and that's 2010. And that's when the current administration did 2 things. First of all, they aligned housing and urban development, the US DOT, and the Environmental Protection Agency, and said, you 3 departments need to work together with missions. So now if I'm at the DOT, not only do I have to worry about safety and mobility, which has been my traditional charge, but I have to think about things in terms of urban development, social equity issues, and those things had always been out there, but it really became, I think, more central to the mission. In addition, the USDA put out the first complete streets policy. And we saw that trickle in where locally our MPO adopted that early, the city of St. Louis. We finally had the county adopt that about a year ago, right? So it took them a little while. But we started to have this. What's interesting with complete streets is it's not a new concept, and very little in what I do is a new concept. You could turn around to the turn of the century, and in that first picture, we had complete streets. We had trolleys and trains and buses and all kinds of things happening. We became very auto-dependent, so now we're trying to push that back for another number of reasons. So what we do also became important with sustainability. And sustainability means different things to different people. This, what I like is, a couple things. For sustainability in Chicago means they've got dedicated bus lanes, they've got dedicated bicycle infrastructure, which is really helpful and important. It can mean things like, the 1874 Eads Bridge in St. Louis that is still used for its original purpose. So you think about the investment that Mr. Eads made in that bridge 150 years ago, and you look at how that bridge has paid off dividends, great investment, very sustainable. In about 2013, Missouri Department of Transportation, if you want to know how conservative we are, if you look at our candidates for governor and for U.S. senator, 2 of the 4 right now, their main claim to fame is that one of them can shoot guns and blow stuff up, and the other one can field strip an M16 blindfolded, right? That's their commercials. So we're right there with the best of them. But they went around throughout the whole state, every single county, and they asked people what they wanted, and it's 4 things. So maintenance, which is a sustainability issue, safety and economic development, or that mobility, which goes back to the kind of the core, the original missions. But in every county, they said they want better connections and choices. They did not want to be car dependent. So not only was this a movement that happened at the federal level and kind of pushing down through the professional ranks, but it's something that we're seeing from the ground up. So it's a real thing. So that means that now we have to pay more attention to things like accessibility. And this means access to services, access to jobs, access to healthcare. These are 2 maps in the St. Louis region, and what's interesting with these is this map shows where you can get, how many jobs you can get to with a car in an hour. And it shows if you live in the city of St. Louis, you can get to almost 100% of the regional jobs within an hour by car. If you look at this map, what this red is showing is that most of the commuter trips are over an hour length, or many of the hours. The average commuter length is over an hour length. And the reason is because these folks don't necessarily have cars. And they're having to take a lot longer than an hour to get to their jobs by car, because they're not taking a car. They're either riding their bike or taking transit or some other means. So accessibility becomes real important. And then all of this is important as well in the context of public health, which is an area that we're starting to be much more sensitive to. So this shows a study that was done, and this is a little while back, but it looked at a correlation between sprawl and obesity rates. And if you look at big issues in the country, public health, obesity, diabetes, I mean, we know that that's a massive issue, and a lot of that is a direct reflection of the transportation system that we've created. So we're trying to move towards active health, which you all know. So this kind of brings me back and sets the stage then for how I got involved in Cycle Savvy and where I think there's a possible connection here. In this context, in 2014, Missouri was trying to pass a sales tax for transportation. And so I was on the internet, on Facebook and Twitter, trying to promote this thing out. And this woman called Karen Carabell put out a quote that said, "You can't paint safety on the road. Safety is a product of informed behavior." And I don't know why I got copied on that Facebook post, but I saw that Facebook post. And this is in the context of St. Louis trying to develop bike lanes. So I sent Karen back a message and I said, "Hey," and you can see we have 21 comments before we get to this. Where's the love? We're trying as an engineering community to be good and to promote bicycling and active transportation. And that started a conversation. So the end of this Facebook conversation was Karen saying, "Hey, we're going to go for a bike ride," and which we did. And my takeaway from that experience then was really a couple things. And Karen and Martin and I have had hours of conversation around some of these. One of the things that I think you need to understand and to advocate on your behalf for is, we say complete streets are streets for all users. You're a user of the system too. So what I'll tell you is kind of my insights on what I hear about bicycle drivers and how that gets interpreted. But if the system doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. It's got to include everybody. And when we say complete streets are for everybody, it's for bicycle drivers as well. And people in my profession have a lot that we can learn from you all. So I've really enjoyed the Cycle Savvy education, learning a lot more about dooring and bike zones, learning about how you can use the platoons, the brakes and the vehicle platoons to get through an interchange, about screening and all those different things that you teach. When you look at the universe of transportation engineers, it's actually pretty small, right? And we look at the universe of bicycle drivers, it's actually pretty small, and there's not much of an overlap. And you can see the power of what happens when we do make that connection and somebody who understands what you all are talking about gets into a position of responsible charge in the changes that they can make. So there's needs to be this education, this information exchange between your group and folks like me. And Mike talked about allies and the engineering part. Well, there's a pretty easy alignment of that potentially, really. So some things, and these are just little pieces of advice for your group moving forward and observations that I've made. First of all, bicycling education is important. When we look at transportation safety, and we can argue whether there's 4 or 5 or 6 E's, the basic 3 that are there are engineering, education, and enforcement. And bicyclist education is as important as all the other educational components of it. So don't let anybody tell you that bicycle education isn't a critical part of the safety equation. And you need to educate motorists, and I would say transportation engineers as well, with the stuff that you have. One of the debates that I've heard and we've had going on and on is, do we put in bicycle infrastructure or is it education? Which one's more important? Which one do we need to do? My answer to that is both. So Karen and I have had this talk multiple times in the past, and what I would say is we've got a big system. So when we look at a project by project basis, we might have a project that I might be advocating for a protected bike lane or a shared use path. What I think you all need to do is ask the question of me or my peers, how are you accommodating me? So what happens a lot of times is you are known as the strong and fearless crowd. I tell you, right? So and I know that's the word that gets used. And in that context, I said, well, they know what they're doing. They can kind of take care of themselves. But I don't think that you should accept that as good enough. I think that rather than saying I'm against something or I'm opposed to this, It's asking that question. Complete Street says you need to accommodate everybody. How am I accommodated in this plan? And force that project team to go back and take a look and to think about how that works and to find a solution that does work for everybody, because we need to accommodate all types of bicyclists. And it's what the context I use is when I'm out with Karen, I ride one way. When I've got my 10-year-old, I'm probably riding, I want to be on a path or I want to be in something protected because it's just a different scenario. The next thing I want to talk about is moving ahead for the future of transportation in just a broader context. So we've all seen movies, we talk about future trends. Go ahead. The big change, like I said, that we've all seen is what's happened with the internet and communications. I like to use this as, I would say the internet's probably the first new transportation mode we've had in 100 years. And people say, the internet's a transportation mode, how is that? Well, it's fundamentally changed the way we shop, it's fundamentally changed the way we bank, it's fundamentally changed the way we use big parts of our transportation system. When our first kid was very small, Christmas meant many trips to the shopping mall. Now it'd be amazing if we did 2 or 3 trips, right? Because it's all done online, it's all done on Amazon. It's changed the way that transportation system's used. And again, the way that we've seen these changes, we're going to see that moving forward. So a couple years ago, St. Louis was 250 years old. And so I did an interview for the Riverfront Times here in town, and they said, we want to talk about what transportation looks like in 100 years. Where do we get the Jetsons? When do we get flying cars? And that was kind of the big expectation moving forward, right? Well, I'll tell you, the technology's here. For a lot of reasons, I don't think that's going to become our next mass transportation mode. It's not where we're going. But we do have 2 big things that are happening in parallel, and it's going to make a lot of changes. So first are connected vehicles. And connected vehicles is a federal program, and the standards are supposed to be out this year, and we should see them in cars by 2020. Actually, Tampa's got one of the big test beds that's looking at this technology. And this very simply allows vehicles to communicate with each other and with the infrastructure. So this is going to become standard equipment on the cars, just like your airbags, right? It's not going to be something that you opt in. Eventually, it'll be on all the cars. And what this does, as you can imagine, we've got 2 vehicles that are coming up to an intersection, and they're going to collide. And the vehicles know that. And also, they can communicate with the light and say, you know what, you've got a red light, you should stop. And then we've got to figure out what happens. Does the vehicle warn the driver? Does the vehicle do self-braking? What happens with that vehicle so that we avoid that collision? So that's connected vehicles. It's vehicles being able to communicate with each other, communicate with the infrastructure. And we've all seen then this idea, or the prototypes with self-driving cars. This is fascinating for me because this was my master's work, was all in the automated highway system back in the day. And when I'm teaching class one day and the student brings out the Google car and I have to look at it, and I thought, wow, we spent all this money with GM and Berkeley and Carnegie Mellon, and we couldn't get anywhere close to this, because when I finished my master's defense, I thought, we're never going to see any of this in my lifetime. But Google figured it out, of all people. And so the key is how did they do it? So back in the 90s, what the plan was that we were going to put magnets in the ground about every 20 feet, every 20 meters, and these cars would follow the magnets around, right? Now you can imagine from a sustainability standpoint, installing all these, maintaining all these, and all those types of things. It just wasn't going to happen. Well, the way Google figured it out, now there's other technologies, but Google figured it out through their mapping. So why Google? Well, it's because they had these maps. And these maps that they have now have resolution down to the centimeter level. As they're driving down the road, they know where every crack in the pavement is, right? They know where every curb cut is. They know if there's a tree, that tree, they've mapped it that it's a tree, or, hey, there wasn't something there 5 minutes ago, that's something different, that's something new that we need to be aware of. So they've got massive amounts of data information that's involved in making this work. So most of you probably wouldn't know, but the first self-driving car demonstration was actually at the 1939 World's Fair. Again, there's very little brand new in transportation in my world that hadn't been thought of by somebody else. We've been talking about doing this for a very, very long time. But why now? And there's 3 big drivers why I believe that this stuff's coming. The first one is we have the technology. We have the ability and the technology through communications to make this happen. The next one, and this one is the one that might, as we get into the next step of this, might give you a little bit of pause. It's being driven by the private market. So past efforts to get these things done were being done by the federal government or some coalition of people trying to make technology happen. This is happening from the private market. In an indication of how unique this is, so this year NHTSA passed, and NHTSA is the National Transportation Safety Administration, they passed regulations on self-braking capabilities. So pretty soon when you buy a car, you won't be able to drive it into a brick wall, the car will stop itself. And as part of their press release, they said the unprecedented commitment means this important safety technology will be more available to consumers more quickly than be through the regulatory process. What this is alluding to is the fact that NHTSA didn't go through its regulatory process, it didn't go through its bureaucratic process to put these regulations out. The car manufacturers said we don't have time for that, and they got together in a room and they hashed it out and they signed it in record time. The government agencies right now are really struggling with how to keep up with this technology. States are passing their own regulations on self-driving cars. So I was talking to some of the people who are responsible for the coding, and they've got to have different regulations in their car, or different code in their car for Florida versus Michigan versus Texas, because those states maybe have different regulations than what self-driving cars are. And in the political environment we know how easy it is to get meaningful legislation passed in a reasonable amount of time, right? So but it's being driven by the private market. And then the last thing, what was really a hang-up in the 90s was, Big Brother, and we're really afraid of privacy. We don't care anymore. We don't pay attention. We're not aware. We're all freaked out that the NSA is collecting some information on us, maybe about our phone numbers. But Verizon knows what kind of toilet paper I use and everything else in the world, right? So our concept of privacy is completely different. And we're seeing it come out. So Precursor technology is out there. You can buy cars with adaptive cruise control, braking assist, those things. This summer down in Georgia, I got to take my kids on a ride in a self-driving Tesla, which for me is pretty cool because, like I said, I thought I was never going to be able to see the stuff, and the kids thought it was the coolest part of their whole vacation is to be able to car that they got to drive itself. So we're there in Pittsburgh. I think somebody here is in Pittsburgh, but right there. So we've got self-driving Ubers on the street, and so this stuff's coming. So here's the big question for everybody. We're not at ITE, at CBB, we're not in the business of actually developing the technology. But the question is, how does this change the transportation system? Because this is going to change the transportation system. And we're starting, let's say within the last year, we've really started to have groups of people really start addressing and asking these questions. So one of the questions I've got is, are we going to get to a point of full automation of all cars? And I think it was Ford that said by 2020 they're going to have cars on the street, fleets of cars that don't have a steering wheel or a brake pedal. At some point, and you saw that motor vehicle crashes are a leading cause of death for a big segment of our population, is somebody going to decide that it's too dangerous to drive your own car and we're going to take steering wheels out? Now that is a social question, right? I mean, you look at the places where we have differences between public safety and personal rights, personal freedoms, and is this going to become one of those issues? We had a big debate on the IT message board about motorcycles. Where do motorcycles play into this? And there was a group of people who figured out that we can do a self-driving motorcycle, but my point was, I don't know if anybody, who does that? So if you had a self-driving bicycle, right, who's going to get on a self-driving bicycle? What's the point, right? So, but where's that going to fall? Where are we going to come out in that? A fundamental question, are we going to need traffic signals? There's groups of people doing research, and there's research papers out there saying we don't need traffic signals anymore because the cars can figure it out. But how do we get PEDs across the intersections? If you're being a bicycle driver, how do you get through an intersection? So some of these things really need to be thought through in the context, and you all need to be involved in the greater discussion, and again saying, wait a minute, how am I being accommodated in this new model of transportation where you say we don't need traffic signals? Because I certainly would like to have one, right? So how do bicyclists and pedestrians fit into this? There's talk about, we've had shared economy, so Ubers are out there. When we have self-driving Ubers that don't need a person in there, the cost goes down dramatically because most of the cost for any of these systems is labor. So how does that change vehicle ownership? And Lyft and Uber would like to believe that in 20 years nobody's going to own a car anymore, right? You're just going to take these fleet vehicles. What does that look like? Big question, debate going on is going to result in more or less driving and some of these other things. So what I would say then is the question is, what does this mean for you looking forward? So again, I'm saying you need to be engaged in the discussion with transportation professionals in how this system evolves to make sure that what we've worked really hard for in terms of creating a more sustainable transportation system and active transportation and public health and those types of things remain. Look for opportunities with the technology. So this is a picture of big housing over here. This is in Tucson, Arizona. University of Arizona is on the other side. And this is basically a bikeway that comes through this area. What they have, this one might be the toucan. So they've got a bicycle preemption system that when a bicyclist is riding down the street, the system picks it up and gives the bicyclist the green light and stops traffic. So that's kind of connected vehicles, right? So are there opportunities to use technology? One thing that I would like to explore in St. Louis, and we're talking about in some areas we have transit priority, where if the transit vehicle's at a certain point in the system, we'll hold the green light for them, or we might give them a green light a little bit early to make the transit system work better. Could we do that for bicycles? So we're talking about in terms of connected cars. What does it mean to have connected bikes? And how could that system improve what you do? And how does that technology work out? Because we should be thinking in terms greater than just cars, but in terms of all vehicles and all drivers, and you're included in that. And there's not a lot of people looking at that right now. But you all can help us understand what is the big thing or two things or three things that can really make that work better. An example that I'm just thinking of with these connected vehicles, if you're a motor vehicle, does it give a warning if there's a bicyclist in the lane ahead? So do the bicycles have to communicate back, or they have the ability to communicate back to the cars and say, hey, there's a bicyclist ahead moving at some rate, and warns that vehicle they need to move over sooner. And again, ask the question coming through, how does the plan accommodate me? That's really the presentation I have, and be happy to have a discussion and help answer any questions.